Welcome, Randir.
Good morning, Mr. Raj.
Randir, we're just going to do a brief introduction, welcome for the day, and then a brief introduction from Sipusetu. And then it should be about 10, 15 minutes. I think in the meantime, if you can just put your camera off and mute, and then we'll bring
Okay,
you in. And thank
no
you for
problem.
getting up at 3 a.m.
Yeah, it's 3 a.m. here. Okay, no problem. I will do that. I'll wait. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to the third week of the public hearings into online intermediation platforms as part of the market inquiry launched by the Competition Commission. Today we move to property classifieds, and in the morning we have Property Central and 0800 Properties, which is an estate agent. In the afternoon we're just going to pick up a couple of participants from last week that couldn't make the slots, and so that's Famous Brands in respect of food delivery and Expedia in respect of travel. For the rest of the week, tomorrow we'll continue with property classifieds, and then on Wednesday we'll look at auto classifieds, and that'll spill over into Thursday morning. For the rest of Thursday, we've got a number of travel platforms and participants that were unable to make the time slots in the first week, and so they'll be coming then. And Friday, the 19th, we'll start with Samsung, where we have the head office participating, and some e-commerce platforms that were pushed out from Wednesday last week. And then, of course, on the 24th, we have a final session with Takealot. There may well be another afternoon session in that week in order to just accommodate those that have been unable to make the slots due to load shedding, as we saw last week. As we're starting with a new category of platforms, I'm going to ask the technical team to do an introduction, and we have Ms. Sipusetu Titani to introduce classifieds more broadly, so this would be auto and property, and some of the issues that have arisen in our further statement of issues.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. Sorry. I will focus on three key areas of the further statement of issues, namely classified platform landscape and trends, platform competition, business user competition and treatment, including that of SMEs and HDP firms. Online classified deal in transaction leads rather than sales and typically specialize on particular product category. The inquiry has identified automotive and property as the two areas where classified platforms hold an important role in providing leads for businesses involved in those markets. In property classifieds, business users include real estate agents, and in automotive, the business users include vehicle dealerships and independent vehicle sellers. Online classifieds appear to have built up most prominence for large once-off purchases where consumers use the internet to research options before going to inspect and ultimately making a purchase decision. Classified platforms seek to aggregate all or most available sellers in one particular category and then offer consumers the convenience of searching and comparing across those sellers on a single platform. The platforms are monetized through the business user side with subscription and other fees. The value proposition to consumers is the convenience of being able to search and compare all sellers on a single platform using a variety of search filters and being connected directly to the business users for further inquiries. This is vastly superior to searching the individual web pages of each individual seller, which is more time consuming and difficult to engage in easy comparison. For business users, the classified platforms have become an important source of leads for sales, given the considerable consumer reach relative to what a business user could generate on their own websites. The fact that businesses pay to list whilst maintaining their own websites is indicative that the platform leads cannot be substituted by own business user website leads, or otherwise there would be no incentive to pay. Individual businesses are also unable to replicate the marketing spend to draw the consumers directly to their own websites in competition with the classified platforms. Nor would that spend be cost effective given the more limited stock to the platforms, relative to the platform, sorry. In measuring the importance of individual platforms, it appears that while site traffic is one indicator that is compared, what matters the most is the volume and quality of sales leads provided by the platform. Sales lead will follow from the level of consumer engagement with the platform and the number of unique users. Ultimately, market position is also reflected in the price that business users pay to list on a platform relative to other platforms. Therefore, listing prices or total revenue is another metric of importance. Within property, the evidence gathered so far indicates that Property 24 and Private Property are the two most important platforms providing leads in this category. And within automotive, AutoTrader and Cars.co.za are the two most important platforms. There are also other smaller platforms which offer business users the opportunity to list for free or for substantially lesser fee in each of these categories. Consumers can multi-home across, so in terms of platform competition, we found that consumers can multi-home across classified platforms. For this reason, marketing is a prominent cost item for classifieds to draw in consumer traffic. The marketing spend is typically spent on Google Ads and on above-the-line marketing and also brand advertising. Established platforms appear to have an advantage in marketing spend, given that their existing position can fund marketing from their existing profit, whilst entrants may need to incur losses to match the marketing spend. The other prominent cost item is staffing, used for selling to and managing the large number of individual business users on the platform. A final major cost item relates to the technology of the platform. Simply generating traffic does not necessarily guarantee success, as the platform needs to convert that traffic to leads. This suggests platform engagement through ease of customer interface and range of listings are also important. Whilst consumers may multi-home across platforms, they may also have a preferred platform or two and simply check other platforms to test if they have additional options not listed on their primary platform of choice. This type of behavior may explain higher levels of site traffic but limited engagement by consumers on smaller platforms. Business users in this category also multi-home, as exclusivity is not a feature of online classified platforms. However, business users still need to consider the return to any marketing spend they make on listings across different platforms. New entrants may be able to initially get listings by providing the service for free to business users. However, these entrants ultimately need to monetize the listings to generate revenue to be sustainable. Revenue may also be required to expand through consumer marketing and better platform technology if the level of shareholder funding is limited and cannot support large losses upfront. It appears that business users are likely to list on one or both of the leading platforms given their importance in sourcing leads, which may reduce the amount of marketing budget left for spending on other platforms. In the case of property classifieds, multi-year subscription agreements may also lock in business users into this pattern of contracting. The inquiry also understands that some classified platforms have joint listing software whereby listings are uploaded to one platform and can also be added to another at an additional cost. This may also lock in the business users into this pattern of contracting with the two leading platforms. The existing leadership position, listing fees, and contracting may therefore pose a barrier for expansion of rival platforms. Online classifieds platform generates considerable data from consumer search patterns in real time and increasingly require or incentivize the provision of detailed data, including visual data from business users for listings. For example, through making data a quality or a factor in ranking or simply requiring it for listings. This collectively provides the platforms with considerable amount of data that can be used to generate market insights for business users in real time. The larger platforms have started selling these data insights to the business users as new revenue stream. Larger platforms may be able to generate more useful insights given the higher consumer traffic and more listings. Another striking feature of online classifieds is the level of profitability of the leading platforms. It appears that once a platform has become important or a must-have for business users in this category, then it is able to raise standard listing fees substantially above the smaller platforms and can unlock numerous other revenue streams. Listing fees for established platforms are typically multiple times higher than smaller platforms, which might reflect the additional lead value provided or their must-have status. It is also evident that on leading platforms, a sizable share of total revenue may be generated from 1, sponsored ranking and featured listings, 2, the sale of advertising to third-party complementary businesses, and 3, the sale of data analytics to business users on the platform. This suggests visibility on those platforms for business users is likely to be more important for a share of, say, leads. The unlocking of these additional revenue streams may reinforce the leadership positions if the platforms invest some of this in technology and marketing. In terms of business user competition and treatment, currently it would seem that online classified platforms do not necessarily compete with business users on the platform in terms of listings. The one exception the inquiry is aware of is private property, which had its roots in estate agencies collectively setting up a portal, even though a majority was subsequently sold. This raises the question as to whether that stake does provide any potential conflict of interest for the minority shareholders. In both the automotive and property sectors, there exist larger dealerships and agency groups with hundreds or thousands of listings competing against individual dealers or agencies. With a small number of smaller agencies with a smaller number of listings. It is common amongst online classifieds to provide volume discounts on listing fees, as the monthly subscription fees is based on different volume categories. The inquiry observes that the difference per lead or listing can be substantial, with the smallest category paying multiple times more than the largest category on per lead or listing basis. Furthermore, it appears that some larger groups are also able to negotiate individualized discount for their groups, which may reduce their cost per lead even further or reduce the cost of sponsored ranking. The inquiry is interested to understand the impact of this differential pricing on participation of SMEs and HDP firms in terms of business users, given the higher cost per lead that it results in. Online classified platforms have increasingly expanded the use of sponsored ranking and featured listings on their platforms, and these now account for a material share of the revenue generated. The scope for offering preferential positioning arises from the sheer volume of listings on the platform, which drives certain business users willing to pay for any means to stand out in consumer searches. It would seem that sponsored search and featured listings do drive more traffic and leads. Otherwise, they would not be used by business users. And the revenue contribution similarly indicates their sizable value relative to basic listings. The inquiry is interested to then understand the extent of additional leads created by these tools and their impact on consumer choice, as well as participation of SMEs and HDP firms. There appears to be some movement within online classifieds to promote the participation of SMEs and HDPs, although that is limited to a few platforms and extremely limited in size currently. For instance, Property24 provides free branded and premium listings along with banner advertising to limited extent to qualifying HDP estate agencies. Also, cars.co.za provides a flexi package to SME dealerships on a pay-as-you-go model for those with low stock numbers. However, given the differential pricing on other aspects of the platform access, such as listing fees, it is not apparent that these necessarily offer a net benefit for SMEs and HDPs. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Tani. I'm now going to invite, I think, the founder of Property Central, which is a property platform, Mr. Randir Jigaru, into the virtual hearing room. Welcome, Mr. Jigaru. Thank you, Mr.
Good morning.
Jigaru, and I believe it's a very early morning for you, 3 a.m. where you are.
It is a bit, yes.
So I just want to thank you on behalf of the panel for making yourself available. I'm joined by Ms. Doris Tsepe and then also other members of the technical team, Mr. Lesofi and Mr. Radinku, who I think you may have interacted with over time. Mr. Jigaru, this is a public hearing, so it is being broadcast out on YouTube, so I would ask you not to traverse confidential information. And we can always set up separate time to do that. So, I mean, maybe just to start, I believe you don't have a presentation, but if you can just start by giving a little bit of background to yourself and how you got into the area of property platforms, I believe with your partner, Mr. Ngwenya.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Hodge. Thank you and the technical panel for having me on board. I'm quite excited to be here. I think it's a very necessary inquiry. I think it's been coming for a long while in terms of the change that needs to happen across the industry, across platforms and so forth. So myself, I am I guess I've been a programmer, a business developer for a long while, and building platforms is kind of what I do for the love of it, and it's my business. So a few years ago, in 2018, we decided to get into the property market. We had a look at what it is. So our presence doesn't arise from any property affiliation, any existing property business. It is what we set out to do in terms of looking at the market and understanding. So our strategy is continuously fed by analysis more than anything else. So I think, not to mince any words, our struggles as a business speaks to what this inquiry seeks to understand. What are the anti-competitive practices that hinder our growth and the ability of ourselves to become a viable business and a significant competitor to the two major platforms. So we entered the market in 2018 after probably a 1.5-year build cycle. We got into the market as an alternative to the current property listing websites. And our intent at the time was to change the game by offering a lower cost product that was affordable, absolutely, to everyone, and agile and superior in terms of innovation, continuous innovation. And I think that's what a young business tends to offer. A young platform tends to offer to a market. So our business model is very simple. So we allow estate agencies and individuals to list properties with us. We're currently free while we build up momentum and build up a critical mass and the traffic to deliver quality leads. But the intent is obviously to charge a fee per agency. We've got to monetize it at some point. So for the last 3 years, we've been free. We've been investing. We advertise significantly across radio, across the digital platforms, Google and Facebook, and somewhat Instagram as well. So yeah, we've got a presence. I think we're known, but not necessarily engaged with as we think we should be after 3 years in the industry. And again, it comes down to what we kind of realized over this time, which is that there are significant hurdles to actually breaking in and making a presence, right? So at the outset, we thought we understood to a large extent what the challenges were facing us. But about a year in or so, we realized that it's a little bit larger and a little bit more closed off than we thought. The industry tends to be a bit, as I said, closed off, anti-competitive, uncompetitive. I would say uncompetitive was our initial view, with a number of issues coming to light. I think the key issue being the monopoly held by private property and Property 24. It's quite significant in terms of any other role player willing to come in to the industry. The other thing we saw, and we know from engaging with the estate agents, the exorbitant prices that tend to be charged by the dominant two platforms. And this can come out of many reasons, but the pricing we find is a bit exorbitant. Having run platforms ourselves, I think there are a few issues arising from lack of competitor websites, the lack of diversity in terms of the platforms themselves, in terms of HDI ownership, as well as just diversity technologies and offerings. And that again is because of the dominance of the monopoly. It just does not allow any sort of shifting forward in terms of technology. We haven't seen any innovation coming out forth for many years. So there is that, and that are, from our discussions with people who've engaged with us, the agents, it tends to lead to a sense of unhappiness. Whilst they engage and they're clients of private property and Property 24, there's a sense of unhappiness. They're bound to them and they want something different, but there isn't a willingness to actually shift to anything else. And I think that comes down to support as well. So overall, these are the issues that we found more coming out of monopoly and an uncompetitive environment. So the 5, I think, factors that we found, and I can distill them with regards to our terms of reference here, is
yeah, Mr. Jagari, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but we can go to each of those individually. So give us the 5, and then I think I'd like to unpack them with you carefully, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So proceed with the top 5, yeah.
In terms of growing as a business, our struggle has been that we are excluded from the joint listing software. And that is probably the most significant factor of us onboarding new clients, right? I think the other one is the ownership or, shareholding or interests in the whole ecosystem held by private property and Property 24. In terms of ecosystem, I mean the whole internet marketing ecosystem, which is the websites offered, the joint listing software, and the platform. So owning that whole chain, again, adds quite a ring fence to anyone else trying to get in. A lot of their clients are obviously bound to one or either of these product sets, and it's very difficult to actually get them to convert away from them because invariably we've got to get onto the joint listing software. Otherwise, their properties are not listed with us. I think there's major conflict of interest in terms of the industry bodies like Rebosa and the role they're playing in encouraging the use of SMEs and HDI-owned platforms like ourselves. Rebosa tends, outrightly only supports private property. And that is a major conflict of interest for anyone trying to get in. We're not, estate agents are not encouraged to use us, and that's basically the view we get. We're not allowed to use you. We're not interested in using you. And you're too difficult to use because you're not part of the syndication software. So those are the 2 major ones that ring fence us out. So I guess, that comes down to lack of support from industry bodies. Aside from the conflict of interest, there's lack of support, complete lack of support from VOSA and other industry bodies, which just happens constantly. And obviously, there's the historical advantage of early movers, the bigger budgets that comes with the early movers, the funding that they've received, and obviously, over time, the better positions on Google search, which we've got to work our way through a number of years to get there. So those are the major issues that I'm seeing. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Jagari, and I think that's a useful introduction. I actually wanted to start with an area before we get into some of the, you say, uncompetitive or anti-competitive actions, just to pick up the issue of diversity. Because, as you may be aware, our mandate for this inquiry, and indeed the Competition Act, is also to try and address the historical disadvantages faced and to encourage the participation of small businesses, but also historically disadvantaged individuals. And part of the specific mandate for this inquiry is also to ensure that as we move into an online economy, that there is participation by historically disadvantaged individuals and what the barriers may be to them and how we can address that. From our first sort of 2 weeks of hearings, to be honest, it doesn't look like the online economy is transformed at all. And I just wanted to find out more, stepping back. The estate agency business as a whole, what has been your experience?
Very previously advantaged. So in terms of property, absolutely. Representation across estate agents as in individual agents, I think minimal. Estate agency ownership, probably even less. Yeah, and in terms of platforms and technology, I'll be surprised with any other player beside myself in the market. Um, yes, the larger companies have representation across the boards and so forth, but actual builders, owners, funders, I think they're pretty much non-existent on the technology side. I think on other platforms, I've definitely seen smaller, I'm talking non-property classifieds delivery systems. I've seen smaller technology companies come up but go by the wayside, or fall by the wayside. So I've seen that happen. Property, I've yet to meet anyone else who is, yeah, HDR or HDP. I don't see it. Our engagement on the individual level, yeah, it's not diverse at all. And there doesn't seem to be a move to encourage it. And like I said, when someone, comes up like Property Central, there's an encouragement to say, let's look at using them. It's just gates closed, please don't come here, you know? And that's how it feels. It literally is that.
Yeah, because I did a little bit of searching myself, because there seem to have been initiatives in the industry since the 2000s. But recently, when they launched the Property Practitioners Act in 2019, it was stated that out of the 43,000 registered agents, only 3,000 were black, and of those, only 400 were principal, which I think goes to
I
your
can
point
certainly
that,
attest to that. Yeah, our numbers, and I didn't want to put it out there, was probably like 95% was white and or other. And yeah, HDP, no, 5% or less, I would say, in terms of our engagement alone, which I think in the current economy is rather low for representation of diversity.
I just want to ask about, I mean, for the few black estate agencies and their agents, do you think the current platforms are servicing them well, or their needs well? I mean, just in terms of their size, the pricing.
In terms of if you're a startup, I've seen them work very hard at what they do. Um, it doesn't encourage them in terms of pricing for sure and the areas in which they work. And I think in my written submission, I did put forward what I call the democratization of property. Some of the areas they work are not necessarily a Sandton or Sandhurst or whatever it is. And unfortunately, the pricing that comes across on private property and Property 24 doesn't um, allow them to list these properties. If you've got a large number of lower sub 700,000 properties, you're not going to be able to put it up there. They're not encouraged to do so. And that's got to do with pricing and the type of representation of properties on those platforms. And that needs to change also. So yes, that pricing is a major factor. I mean, if I look at the pricing structure, the smaller estate agents are paying 5,000 Rand upwards, the larger medium guys paying 20,000 or so for a monthly listing of properties, which in my view is ridiculous. And I think that's what keeps them out, if anything else. It doesn't encourage them to grow their businesses. It doesn't encourage them to grow their businesses in the right areas, outside of the very expensive areas. And that's where the struggle comes on board. The other issue is that by not listing the lower end properties, owners of those properties don't unlock the value in their properties because they don't get the leads when they put up their properties for sale. They may put up their property to a local estate agent who will get two interested buyers. If you were to put it up digitally, you suddenly have 10, 15 interested buyers. And that unlocks the value of your property, which we also don't see happening. So it's two levels, at the agency side, and obviously it's on the owner's side as well. And how do you get them on board a platform that is just so expensive? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I also did a little bit of research, and on the largest platform in Cape Town, I went to Langa, and there were 3 listings. Gugulethu 7. I'm sure there are many more properties in those township areas. But what you're saying, as I understand, is when you're dealing with low-priced houses, the exorbitant fees make it uneconomic to list, and so it's not servicing those sellers as well as the agents well.
So, and to that point, when one looks, sorry to interrupt you, when one looks at the property market, if you were outside and you suddenly, pop onto one of our property platforms and you say, wow, this is South Africa, it is actually not a true representation of what South Africa is. Those are just the top end areas or the medium to high income areas. That is not what South Africa is about. And that, if you look at a property, the listing website, that's what you see. That's not actually what South Africa is about.
And I'm going to come to the sort of specific barriers around syndication, conflicts of interest. But if this is essentially an untransformed industry, I mean, can you give us a sense of the other kind of challenges that you may face as an historically disadvantaged individual trying to make headway here? So apart from the specific practices, almost the softer stuff, the business networks, the other elements.
I think the softer things are definitely the business networks, without a doubt. Like I said, I came in with no property background, just purely from a technology side. I think if there were more HDP individuals who were from the property side, you would see more of those people stepping up, more of us stepping up, coming across rather than one or two. And I think that's that's the network effect. That's the effect of having existed or not in the industry, which we have not, from any significant sales perspective, marketing perspective, or anything like that. And I think that's one of the things you would see, and my experience is there. The other thing is actually the network effect. Again, not having the property background, not having the previously advantaged background, we don't know directors in companies that will suddenly get their business listed with. I can't call up my friend from Michael House, please come and list your state agency with us, or, we're willing to do business with you. Those sort of network effects at the personal level definitely exist. And then above that, at institutional level, when we look at organizations like Robosa and private property, and you look at the shareholding and people who sit on the boards, you can definitely see the network effects of that. Some of them, they will argue, came out of necessity and need to grow a separate platform, but there's definitely a network effect that continues to happen. We've had companies like Pan Golding who refused to do business with us for whatever reason, but I'm sure if I knew someone there, it would be a little bit different. I could call someone somewhere and say, you know what, can we meet and discuss this? Perhaps you can come on board our platform. Network effect is massive in this industry.
And I just want to ask on the funding side as well. I mean, in the first week we had some venture capital, the South African Venture Capital Association come to us. We also heard from Naspers Foundry, which is a venture capital fund. But certainly over the last week when we were doing food delivery, there's a number of township entrepreneurs that have emerged but are not getting the funding. When we asked the Venture Capital Association about transformation of that, we were told that unless the institutional investor has a specific mandate for them, that's not necessarily going to be on the radar. So I just want to understand, you said you're funding your business at the moment. Your experience of the venture capital industry and funding for portals such as yourself or other business ventures. So just what your experience has been.
I think, to be honest, my experience has been minimal. I haven't gone out to seek funding yet. I've had one discussion, but it didn't seem like something I wanted to do. So it's not something that I would really comment on significantly in any way, to be honest.
No, that's fine. It was just to see if you had any engagements or not. Let's get then to Property Central and property platforms. And I think often when we talk of platforms, we talk about the two sides, the consumers and in this case, the estate agents. And as we understand, consumers like platforms or aggregators because they aggregate, because you've got listings you can compare. You can go to one place and do a complete search, compare options. Just to get your comment on that, is that your experience too? Is that why you launched a platform?
Absolutely. The point is to give them choice, variety, and the ability to compare prices, features, whatever. It gives them the greater choice when making the decision. Um, in that, yes, two-sided or multi-sided platforms, that is the service we provide. We've got to onboard clients who are willing to sell their product, and we've got to get the eyeballs and the traffic onto those platforms as well. So yes, that's the area any of our platforms would play.
And if you're going to a platform to compare, I mean, I would presume you want to have the most listings on your platform. Is
Yeah.
that the objective?
Yes, absolutely. The fewer properties you have, the less competitive you are. Your client will see two houses instead of 20 houses in an area if you're searching. So after a minute, he's off the platform. You want to have as many as possible. And I think that is the significant barrier we face is getting a significant number, critical mass of properties to offer serious interest to people who are willing to look at what we have. And to stay onto the site. And we've grown a sense of loyalty from our customers, certainly. It just might be that we do things differently, and that's what we intended to do. But yes, the more property you have, the better, obviously, your traffic will be over time.
And to your last point, I mean, you'd also compete on other factors, but I suppose properties are an essential element. But you also use experience and what the user journey that might also set you apart, the innovations that you talk about.
Yes, so like any other website platform, your stock, your inventory is obviously what the user generally comes for. Uh, then it's the user experience and customer service. I think those all have to be on point in order for you to gain loyalty, grow your market share, and so forth. Innovation speaks to all of those things. I think that is what drives what we continue to do and how a platform continues to grow. And funny enough, one of the things that we've seen with the dominance of the private property and Property 24 is people may not like it, but lack of innovation. Uh, they're almost carbon copies of each other. And without fresh blood, without fresh eyes, without a fresh, um, way of doing things, I don't think that's going to change. Especially being held by larger companies, they tend to be slow moving, unfortunately. And if you've spoken to, and you have spoken to, for example, the township entrepreneurs, they've got a different way of doing things. We small guys have a different way of doing things. We can move faster, and we see gaps that exist that the larger players don't. And that absolutely speaks to the innovation and what we can deliver. And we understand more that type of client as well.
And that I think goes to exactly why we want competition to exist
Yeah,
and innovators to come through, but also why we need transformation, because as you put it, you're going to understand what different people need, different estate agents need, different customers need. So I want to just go to the syndication software that you raised, and just this is also useful for the public who don't know all the back end of all of this. But I mean, as I understand, the estate agents have to put up listings onto their own website and also want to list on platforms such as Property 24, Property Central. We'll come to whether they can list on Property Central, but you don't want to do that multiple times. So as I understand, syndication software is a way to manage your listings, and that those should then link to where you want to list. Is that, I mean, is roughly correct?
that is correct. So yes, it's a single system or software that allows you to list across multiple platforms and your own website in most cases. Yes, so that's correct. So it allows you to list, it allows you to manage, you get leads from them and so forth.
And so I mean, you'd want to, as part of the functionality of that syndication software, be able to select which properties you put on your own website, which ones you list on different platforms, and the range of platforms that you may want to list on.
Yes, so those decisions are driven by having your own website for one, and then which other platforms you've paid for. So, for example, Private Property and Property 24 are paid platforms. And then you get the free to listing platforms like, well, we would be one ourselves, but I think there's Imo Africa and so forth. So there's a few other free ones, and obviously, if you're not paying for private property and Property 24, you're going to choose the free ones to list on. So yes, that's exactly how it works. So the stock, the inventory, flows through the joint listing software services, and it's a significant backbone to the flow of stock into the different platforms. And once you're excluded from that, it's very difficult to get them on board. For example, Property Central, because they don't want to have to list many times. They want to obviously do it once and get it everywhere. And that's totally understandable. Who wants to do 3 times the work when you don't have to?
Yeah, and I
I can
suppose
continue as to what, or how it affects, or what the effect is with regards to being ring fenced out of it, which is that we just don't get all the properties. We don't get the fresh properties. We've had to come up with innovative ways of getting the stock onto our platform, which is having a capturing team which looks at a client's properties and gets them on board, which is a manual way of doing it. For example, that's one of the ways we do it. So it's a service we offer for free. Whereas if we were part of the syndicated software or the joint listing software, it would make it easier. They would be updated freshly and so forth. And, they exist for a reason. The issue is that if you exist, or if it's owned by a larger platform, is it fair? Because it's being used to exclude us, is what we find. We've made requests
Mr.
to.
Dugu, can I just take you a step back, Mr. Gugaru?
Okay.
I mean, as I understand from your submissions, there are 5 big syndication software. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, I mean, you subscribe to a syndication software because you don't want to do it twice or 3 times getting your listing. And 2 of those, as I understand, are linked to the main platforms you've identified. So Fusion is linked to Private Property, and Prop Control is linked to Property 24, as I understand. And as I understand, those 2 link to each other. So I could be on Prop Control, and there's a link to allow me to list on Private Property, and the other way around.
I'm not clear on whether they're actually linked to each other. I haven't even bothered to find that out. But yes, the 2 major ones are owned. The 2 major ones are owned by the 2 major players. The other large one is Prop Data, which I think is independent. But yes, yeah.
And as I understand,
I'm assuming for purposes of doing businesses across the 2 large platforms, they would have to be linked.
So it's technically possible to link from a syndication software to a platform, and
Absolutely.
you're a programmer, so I assume it's technically not a problem.
Well, that's why they exist, is that other people can receive feeds or push feeds through to them. So it's absolutely, that's the reason they exist, is to do that.
And you have technically linked to 2 others, I believe, Webbox and Integral.
We are in the process. They're 2 independent, Webbox and Integral, they're actually 2 independent joint listing software service providers and website providers. And they've been kind enough to actually allow us on board. And funny enough, yes, for example, Integral has a competing product with us, which is called My Property, but they still allowed us on board, whereas the large companies like Private Property and Property 24 through Fusion and Prop Control have refused us any access to it.
So can you just tell us, I mean, your engagements, you've basically said they've refused to link with you. I assume you've approached them to enable a feed and offer presumably a service which should be in the interests of their clients, their estate agents. So what went down when you did approach them?
Simply, probably 2 sentences. No, we're not interested in doing this. It's not going to happen in the future, in the near future. Nothing more than that. Asked for further engagement, nothing's come of it. So yes, absolutely nothing done. And you're right, the offering should be to improve your clients' exposure and experience, which is the reason Integral gave us when they allowed us to feed, so they can improve the experience and the offerings to their own clients, even though they have a competing product.
All right, so basically no engagement. You followed up, refused to.
Nothing.
All right, and technically it's feasible.
No. Yes, obviously, technically, yes,
Right.
they do it without platforms. Yes.
And so, I mean, you obviously have already said that this has an impact. Um, I mean, I did have a look. I don't know how many properties you've got on your website. I think it was 25,000 or so.
Should now 35,000 upwards, but yeah, around there. So it goes up and down around there. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if you had access to those two, what would your listings be?
Geesh, good question. I think they get up to 250,000 listings at any one time, or when I last checked. So it could be anything up from there to the same numbers, 200, 250,000 listings. And that will be driven by one, currently we're free. We advertise, which none of the other platforms do. None of the other independents do. We advertise, like I said, on Google, on Facebook, Instagram, and on radio. So we have uh, presence, market presence. Our brand is fairly well known. It's just because they cannot get their properties on us that many of them do not list with us. So yes, there's advantages to being with us. And we've even got in our terms and conditions, when we do charge, there's a flat fee that's going to be charged, and it's significantly less than any of the existing paid platforms charge. So there's no reason for them not to list with us.
So, I mean, from your discussion there, is it that some estate agents have come to you and said, look, I'd like to be on your platform, but I can't technically? And is that
Many,
why
many,
you
many.
offer private capture?
Yes. So many, many have. They've come on board, but they found it's just managed and so forth. When the listing is sold and so forth, they find it's a problem to come back and search which one's gone and then switch it off or add new ones as they come onto the market. So those are they've come to us and said, we'd love to be on board, but we cannot. And there are those who haven't been on board at all, but wouldn't even look at it because it's just too much work, especially if it's a larger estate agency. I mean, some of them have 100 agents and so forth. And so they have an administrator or two who would then manage that for the whole lot of people. And they just don't want to look at another platform where they've got to duplicate work. And that's a significant factor for us.
And yeah, if you overcame those barriers, you'd have almost 10 times as many properties, which presumably would make you much more attractive to consumers who you're marketing to.
Exactly, and that would then allow us to become a viable business, a paid platform, gain trust in the industry, gain significant traction to growth, and obviously offer a different service, a differentiated service, differentiate customer care, and so forth.
Now, it seems your second issue is that even if you were able to integrate, you say you don't get support from the industry body Rebossa. And I mean, as I understand, Rebossa represents, well, I mean, you tell us how representative are they of the industry and who mainly
Well,
is
if you
there?
look at their website, it says they are the largest state agency body in the industry, which I'm obviously likely to believe. And yeah, they flatly refused any support for us and probably any other platform. When we approached them in 2019, that's what we were told. We will not be paying any other platform, only private property amongst their members. It's criminally uncompetitive, I think, especially coming from any sort of industry body, which represents the majority of members, estate agents. That means they're not looking at any SMME, they're not looking at any HDP-owned businesses, nothing like that. That alone is just a statement on its own.
I tend to agree with you. Um, can I just find out who you approached from Rebossa and what exactly was the reasons being provided for not supporting you?
So my neighbor in the building that we tenant is a Leapfrog franchisee. And when we got started, I approached him, I spoke to him, and he said, you know what, our CEO is the chairman of, or CEO of Robosa as well, Mr. Yandaru. So he got on the phone, and I think it was an email as well, to tell Mr. Leroux about us. And the response was flatly, no, we will not be supporting anyone. We will not be paying anyone else but private property, because in a few years' time, there'll be competition and we'll be paying them as well. So that was, to paraphrase, the response.
All right, so you didn't even get in the room with Robosa. You got
Nothing.
turned down.
No.
I mean, what do you think of that reason in terms of what's your perspective? That you're
Very, very
saying,
short. But
explain.
if you align your, first of all, as an industry body, like I said, your conflict of interest is massive. You cannot align yourself with one player. You're just setting yourself up for another. You're not giving your members the best in terms of competitiveness, in terms of innovation, in terms of differentiated offerings. You're aligning yourself to one platform, which is then going to own you for as long as you exist, and doesn't need to offer you anything different, improve in any way, or do anything different. And that kills your innovation and kills your innovation cycles, kills anything else you want to do to change and be different. Are you offering, as an industry body, are you offering your members the best if you are not willing to look at anything else? And that was downright unwillingness. It's no second opinion, no discussion, no nothing. No, we'll not be looking at you. You cannot be representing your body in the best manner possible if that's your attitude to things. I mean, you're turning down platforms that can give you different features, different functionality, can meet the needs of your different members differently and more suitably, can offer you far better pricing that you're getting right now. Why would you want to lock yourself in to anything else? Instead of, let's look at this. Let's look at this platform. Let's look at how they're doing things. There's 5 other people doing it. Why not look at what they're doing instead of a flat out no response? It's extremely short-sighted. You're doing no different than they've been doing for the last 20 years, which is locking themselves into one or the other platform and seeing it as a solution. And yes, some of the reasoning may be, Property 24 is so large, it's going to be so hard to catch up to them. Nonsense. They are competing on funding for marketing. This is a technology platform. Innovation is what drives growth and future growth. Not necessarily money. They're going to throw as much money as they want into marketing to try and compete with Property 24. That's not how it works. If you want to make a difference, you innovate. And I don't see, that sort of innovation coming from either of the 2 platforms, unfortunately.
And Mr. Jagaru, they might come and say, well, exactly as you put it, in the battle against Property 24 and the high fees on Property 24, as I think they've said in public, we need to back a competitor. And if we all back private property, then that's going to be the long-term solution. I mean, what would your response be to that?
Short-sighted again. You could be flogging the dead horse constantly. And I can't see it any other way. You're going to back the competitor, but why do you need to put so much into this thing when there are other people who are willing to do it anyway? It shouldn't be your position. And yes, maybe 15 years ago, there was no one else. But we've reached a point where, the diversity of technology and platforms is just growing constantly. You don't have to align yourself with something like that. It's just so short-sighted. And it doesn't speak to the current economic reforms that we should be pushing forward. There's times you need to start changing your allegiances. It hasn't significantly worked, I think, and I think many agents will testify to that, or attest to that, should I say, is that it hasn't really worked for them. But also things are changing. you need to change with the times. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, as you put it, there are innovations out there that could also disrupt, that may come from other sources, potentially yourself, if you had that support. So,
Everything is about disruption nowadays, and that's what drives growth and change.
I just want to pick up then, the other issue, which is the other side, the consumer side. Um, And I think if we've set out in our further statement of issues, it seems marketing spend and marketing is a big part of aggregators, because you want to bring the consumer to your site. Obviously, once they're on your site, as you indicated, you've got to have a product offering that keeps them there. Otherwise, they desert you.
Hmm.
But you raised the issue of sort of, I think you raised in the context of almost organic ranking on Google, but I mean, can you give us a sense of the customer journey in property? Um, where do they go to? Is it Google? And how do you improve your visibility there, and how you've been able to compete in that space?
Okay, so I think the customer journey probably has two points of departure. I think the significant one being properties for sale Santon. They would go and type that into Google, right? I think that's where the main one would come to. The second one would be um, private property Santon, or property for sale Santon, private property. So there's first level is searching by area. Second level is probably brand recognition of a platform that they're aware of or probably trust. So those would be the two. And the third point where they would go and type in privateproperty.co.za directly. So I guess how this plays out is if they do the search, um, property for sale Santon, if your SEO is pretty well done, if you're well aged in the market, well aged in Google's indexes, you're going to start popping up on the first two, three, four um, listings for organic search, right? And that's, I don't know how much detail you wanted me to go into, but yes, organic search is based on various factors. Age being one, the website, the trust of that website, and so forth. There's a whole lot of factors that play into it.
Yeah, and we had
Technically,
Google here in the first week, interestingly.
okay.
I mean, maybe
Sorry, you
just
want
a
to go.
question for me is, I didn't realize age of website was a factor.
Oh, well, yes, if you're long in the market and you've produced quality results, yes, you trust it. Experience. Um, Newer websites take a while to get indexed and to grow their index ranking. Age is a factor, without a doubt. Uh, uh, so yes, the longer you're in the industry and you've provided fair quality rankings, you're fairly well trusted, you'll start cropping up on the top rankings. Now, with that, you can also go search property for sale Santon, and Google's paid ads will pop up right at the top. So the first thing you're going to see is a paid ad by one or other of the platforms. So if you go property for sale Santon, the two platforms with the largest budgets are obviously Property 24 and Private Property. So in most cases, they would be in the first two, three positions in terms of paid. Thereafter, in terms of organic, you'll see the same thing. Obviously, they've got the largest uh, uh, trust by Google so far. So yes, in terms of paid, one, two, probably them, and then organic, one, two as well. And that's in areas and suburbs. They can also obviously bid for the competitors' names and website names should they choose to. So, for example, if they're private property, will probably bid on property 24's searches. So, if someone goes search property 24, chances are private properties bid for that keyword as well. So all of those things play a role in the departure point for searches, for users looking to buy or rent. It's whether they go to the brand they trust or no, usually it's no, I guess, or whether they just do a search for whatever's in the area. And the platforms do come up first in most cases, which gives them the greater variety rather than going to an individual estate agent's website.
Well, that's what I also wanted to ask you is, we're told by these big platforms that, well, they compete with the website of the estate agent, they compete with Gumtree, they compete with OLX. I mean, what's your view on that in terms of just your understanding of the consumer journey? And
I don't see an estate estate agent's website as a competitor. They do not offer the variety across a suburb or an area that a platform would. They may offer niche offerings. Very specifically, you may trust that brand and go to it. For example, a Pam Golding or whatever it is, you would trust that brand and go to it. But as a platform, I don't see them as competitors at all, at all. And having spoken to a few of the estate agents, the traffic they receive from their own websites is pretty insignificant. They know they've got to be on a platform in order to drive sales and good leads, at least.
so, what role does the website play then? Sorry, please finish your sentence, then I'll ask my question.
Yes. You were saying in terms of, I think, Gumtree and IOL property or something like that. The other
OLX,
platforms.
Gumtree, yeah.
Oh, OLX doesn't appear.
Facebook Marketplace as well.
We have found there are quite a few agents who struggle to pay the fees of the two large platforms who switch to Facebook and sell directly off Facebook. We've seen them do it quite often, and they come to us, funny enough, obviously because we're free. So we've seen that happen. In terms of OLX and so forth, I don't even see OLX appearing on a search if you search for an area. So I wouldn't think they would be a property competitor. Gumtree, occasionally, but again, they don't specialize. And I think a lot of users look for the specialist websites. In terms of what you do find on, for example, Gumtree would be the diversity of property, the lower end property, the odd properties that you're not going to find on, and probably like, weird little home, freestanding homes and so forth in odd areas that no one's willing to put on. You'd find them on the alternate platforms that are free, for example, Gumtree and so forth. But the bulk of indexing on Google's first page is generally the larger platforms.
So what would as you say, these are the specialist property. So for the consumer, is that a different experience to a Gumtree if I'm looking for properties?
It is. It's obviously more focused. The searches are very good. The whole interface is built for a specific need. Whereas, the more general classifieds the user experience tends to be a bit more generic. You may find the search may not be as great. Again, I'm not saying that is true, but it's more about the user experience and what you want to look for and how fast you want to find it. And chances are you will also get more updated properties on the specialist properties because they're paid to be there.
Mr. Jagara, I don't want to keep you too much longer. It's now close to 4 a.m. And breakfast time. What do you think should be done? You've raised a number of issues. If we make findings on some of these, we're obliged by our Competition Act to actually put in place remedial action. So what would you suggest should be done?
I think I'm going to come in with quite a bludgeoning approach here. One is, I think bodies like Robusta need to disengage from partnerships and conflicted partnerships with platforms like private property to allow us being HDI, HDP, SMEs to get a foot in the industry, and not for profit taking on our side, but to also offer different products and innovative products, and something the industry sometimes needs. Different people need different things, and we're just being excluded. So definitely disengage from strange partnerships, conflicted partnerships, and so forth. I would like to see, industry bodies like the AAB, Robosa, the estate ESA as well, estate agents of South Africa. They need to recognize and support new or independent HDI-owned portals like Property Central and any other one that comes along. There has to be a recognition that it exists, and support, not just close the gates on us. You're too small, or we don't know you, or whatever it is. How is it going to change if we don't get that recognition in the first place? At least allow us to walk the pathway a little bit. What did I put down? So I think, yes, it's fast tracking the support and to be promoted by the bodies to be used. Demonopolization of the syndication software platforms and the whole ecosystem. Should the larger platforms have such significant interest or ownership of the website development? So they offer website packages, along with which they offer the joint listing software and sometimes alternate marketing. That has to be demonopolized or managed in a way that at least gives other platforms a foot in the door, allows us to enter the industry. Without that joint listing software, we're pretty much excluded. And it makes anything we do years long. And yeah, whether we ever get there, we don't know. I'm at it 3 years, and we might be growing, but very slowly. So demonopolizing the joint listing software, demonopolize the whole marketing, internet marketing ecosystem. And, I think from an inquiry perspective, to look at the collusion between companies like Private Property, Property 24, and the industry bodies. Why should this exist? Why should one platform be preferred over another, aside from old marketing tenets that they struggled with before? I don't think there's space for it anymore. So investing in the collusion, the interests of shareholding and board members, or whatever it is that exists, these odd relationships. And I guess some sort of mandated, what's the word, regulated support for HDI businesses in the industry, because it's not happening. It really is not happening. As you said, the numbers are quite ridiculous. If it's not changing by itself, something needs to happen to change it. It's not going to change by itself. And we understand that from the discussions we have. Very closed off, very clannish. It's not going to happen without some sort of regulation around it. So yeah, those are my recommendations.
Well, I think, Mr. Jugari, you've given us a lot of food for thought, and probably the industry as well. I mean, we will be speaking to others tomorrow, including Property 24, Private Property, My Property as well. And following you, we've got an estate agent as well to give their experience. I don't think there's any more questions from my fellow panel members of the technical team. So I think it's just left for me to thank you for getting up before 3 a.m. in order to be on board here, and to wish you all the best with your business. And we certainly, I think, take your submissions very seriously, and we'll be exploring this. And so please remain in touch with the inquiry, and we will also look to be in touch with you and as we take it forward. So our next stage is, after doing these public hearings, is to come out with some findings and, if necessary, any preliminary recommendations in the first half of next year.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me on board, having me participate. Like I said, it was so necessary. I'm looking forward to what's going to come next. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jugari. You may leave the virtual hearing room now, and we can invite, I think it's Mr. Manning from 0800 Property. I'll check with the technical team if he's ready. Welcome back. Mr. Mr. Manning has some technical challenges, and we're going to take a break and resume at 11:45 with his participation at that stage. We should have overcome all of those challenges by then. So we'll welcome you back in about 25 minutes. Good morning. We had hoped to resume with Mr. Manning from 0800 Properties, but unfortunately, I think the technical challenges have overwhelmed him and us. So we are going to reschedule that participation from Mr. Manning, and we'll let the public know when we have rescheduled it. For the rest of the day's proceedings, we're going to resume at 2 o'clock with Famous Brands, and then following that we have Expedia, and that should be at least probably starting around 3 o'clock. And that's the rest of the program for today. So we'll resume at 2 o'clock.